Oi, oi, it's your boy, the Drew Dober of winning you over with my charisma and charm. Jack Slack, it's the Jack Slack podcast coming at you on Wednesday because that's how we do now. We do Wednesday previews. This weekend's card, it's alright, not complaining. Might be some fun ones on there. I've done a little bit of educating myself into the guys who I hadn't really heard of or didn't remember. So we'll be talking about that. Yeah, sounds good. What's going on in MMA at the moment? Oh, the Hans Molenkamp drama continues. I don't know if we actually talked about that much when it happened. Was that last week? The Dominic Cruz fight? Because I didn't watch any of the commentary and I didn't watch any of the interviews. But Dominic Cruz, after the fight, was like, I want to fight Hans Molenkamp. And he drew attention to the fact that Monster Energy has a guy in charge of the purse strings for MMA fighters, getting sponsorships, who is a cringe lord. It's really incredibly lame, the stuff that he does. You can go check out his social media. Basically, it's like him flexing on fighters and fighters having to be like, oh, you're so cool, Hans Molenkamp. There is an amazing shot. There's one of him giving TJ Dillashaw a piggyback, and there's another one of him with Dominic Cruz riding on the handlebars of his bike. It was just so funny when it came out that Dominic Cruz is angry at this dude mainly because he posed him in these, or made him pose in these incredibly lame photos. But yeah, there was more revelations, continuing drama in that this week because Bisping came out and basically told his story about Hans Molenkamp, and then a guy called Courtney Hendo, who was a photographer and then got signed by Molenkamp to do photography for Monster of their fighters, and then ended up working almost exclusively for Molenkamp. Did I say Mellencamp like John Cougar a second ago? Anyway, he ended up working for Molenkamp more than Monster, and it just had some great stories about it. Basically, the whole situation is hilarious because, as Hendo explains it, Molenkamp controls the purse strings on Monster sponsorships, and most fighters, even at the highest level, can't survive without the $2 or $3 grand a month that Monster gives them through Hans Molenkamp, and he decides who gets it. Now, this is another example of fighters just not having any class consciousness, job consciousness. But the problem is that you're not being paid enough in a professional sporting league worth billions of dollars that you can train full time. The problem is that you need a Monster sponsorship to live, and they've taken away your ability to have your own sponsors by making you wear uniforms without any brands on them. There's the problem. But the answer seems to be, what if Dom Cruz fought this guy in a charity bout? Just astonishing. Like, the reason that this guy has control over people's lives is because they are independent contractors who have given up their ability to get their own sponsorships by giving up their ability to wear sponsors in the ring. And I was arguing with some weird Venom simp this week about uniforms in professional sports. And he was like, every sport's got a professional, or every professional sport has a uniform. And yes, insofar as if you go into tennis, they say you must wear this and this. They don't say you must wear the this and this provided. You are still free to have your sponsorship by Nike or Adidas or whoever the fuck you want. Some tournaments specifically are like you can only wear white, like Wimbledon, but they still let you wear your brand's white, your sponsor's white. In fact, most sports where guys wear uniforms without sponsors on or without their own sponsors are team sports. And more than that, they're sports where the players are already considered employed or employees of the league, which means they get a ton of benefits, including like healthcare coverage, which will probably be, that's important for athletes anyway because they all wreck their bodies. But you'd think it would be even more important for combat sports athletes because they're wrecking their brains. But no, just another week with zero awareness of why issues are happening and how to fix them in MMA. I mean, it's not asking people to set up, to give all power to the Soviets and then descend into global Bolshevism. It's just asking people to get together as a workforce and say, look, we'd like to have our own sponsors, please, or pay us more money so that we can actually live and fight full time, which you're benefiting from. But that's the fighter's mind, isn't it? As we've said in the past, it's hard as a man, and particularly as a fighter, I imagine, to not be like, I've got a hammer. Every problem is a nail. If I could just go back in time and make Hitler catch these hands. But anyway, that's that rant over. What else is going on? Oh, Jorge Masvidal versus Usman 2 was announced. We lost Rob Whittaker versus Paulo Costa, but you do get Usman versus Masvidal 2. You lucky scamp. Though the upshot is that it's happening in April, I think, as opposed to like September, because we thought they were going to film a season of Tough over the summer, and that'd take fucking ever. And Stephen Thompson was making noise about fighting Colby Covington, which would be a great setup for actual title challenger after that. I mean, Thompson versus Leon Edwards would be better, but, you know, whatever. Other news, Don'Tale Mayes is out of the fight this weekend. Don't ask Don'Tale. That means that Tai Tuivasa is without an opponent. I mean, Sergey Spivak could come back in and lay on him again with no preparation. That was the funniest fight I've ever seen. But yes, one less fight to talk about today. That's happened literally just now. Hakeem Dawodu versus Mosfar Evloev has been booked. You know, Dawodu and Evloev, both very exciting fighters. That's been booked for June, so the downside is that you have to wait. And then, like, every big man in combat sports got caught as part of organised crime. You got Jake Hyun from Rising was caught drug trafficking. Joseph Parker, top 10 heavyweight in boxing, was caught as part of some drug ring. And then Jamal Ben Sadiq from Glory also. So just, if you're a big lad, you're probably earning some money on the side doing shady hustles. So that's enough moaning. Let's talk about this card. Will we have any moaning about? Actually, this card's all right, if I'm honest. Main event, Derek Brunson versus Kevin Holland. It's, who would have seen this coming as, like, top of the heap middleweight action a couple of years ago? But both guys are on... Well, Brunson's on sort of like a short rediscovery of himself, whereas Kevin Holland has just gone from strength to strength. He's the man of the quarantine. We thought it would be Billy Quarantino because that was his name, but Kevin Holland, since... So, okay... He took a fight in March 2020, which was when things were just sort of kicking off. Oh, and they weren't kicking off in America just yet. But May 2020, fights Anthony Hernandez, knocks him out. Joaquin Buckley, 3 months later, knocks him out. 1 month later, decisions Darren Stewart. Another month later, Charlie Ontiveros. And then like 40 days after that, he fights Jacare in his biggest fight since Thiago Santos, probably. And he scores the bizarrest knockout of the year. But honestly, he's been looking fantastic. When was his last loss? Brendan Allen back in October 2019. I wanted to say October last year. It feels like no time has passed, yet all time has passed. But before that, he was on a good little run back to Thiago Santos. But the Santos fight, you know, he looked overmatched. Whereas now, he's looking pretty good. I mean, the Santos fight, he got put on his back and roughed up by a bigger, stronger guy. But then he got the same from Ronaldo Souza and, like, wasn't even bothered. He was striking upwards with elbows, comes up with a punch and knocks out Jacare. Incredible stuff. Like, not only the weird knockout, but the actual work he'd been doing up to that was pretty impressive. And, of course, every time that Joaquin Buckley knocked someone out after that Holland loss just made Holland look better. Because he made Buckley look like trash. I mean, Buckley did just get sparked by Alessio De Chicaro, but that was like a minute or two into their fight. Kevin Holland took him apart for 2 whole rounds and then sparked him early in the third. And he was talking the entire time. It was fantastic. But Brunson's rebirth has been very interesting. Cisco Brunson, as I now call him. If he's got the blonde hair, well, not blonde hair like that. You know that shitty, like, yellow blonde that you can bleach your hair? I don't even know how you do it. Do you bleach it and then dye it? It's the same colour that Cisco had and Ruby Road in Fifth Element. So when he's got that hair, he's just on point. I'm not even joking, because against Edmund Shabazian in his last one, Shabazian was hot shit and now has just disappeared because Brunson murked him. And it was the best I've ever seen Brunson look, because Brunson used to be a meme fighter. We used to talk about him. I used to hate when they headlined events with him because I can't get a lot of content out of, look how stupidly this guy fights. He runs in with his shoulders... Well, basically his back is parallel to the floor. His shoulders are directly in front of his hips, and his chin is up, looking at the ring lights. It's incredibly bad form. But in the last one, he looked very good, and there was still like, it is like head whip. You know, there's who's the most famous Olympic lifter with head whip? There's been a few, but guys who like throw their head back violently while they're trying to lift the bar up. He's got like a twitch that makes him do that anytime he tries to commit to a punch or even cover up. Like in his last one, he was doing well, staying on top of his feet, being defensively sound, and then he put his guard up. And when his guard came up to block punches, his chin would go up. And you're like, what? How have you learned that? And I've seen so many clips of him with like a tennis ball under his chin in training, trying to keep it down. It's just a bizarre tick that he has. And it's probably the worst tick you could have as a professional fighter. When I get in exchanges, my chin goes upwards. But if you watch that Shabazian fight, Brunson's the southpaw, Shabazian's orthodox, and Brunson just keeps getting into proper range, and then he's leading with kicks and coming down with punches. Anytime Shabazian grabs his leg off a kick, he just calmly takes his leg back and moves into a clinch or shucks him off. It was a very impressive application of his wrestling in a striking sense. And it's something we've been talking about loads lately. Like Dustin Poirier was the best example of it, but Leon Edwards. If you are comfortable wrestling, you can be more comfortable moving into an appropriate range before you strike. And that was half of Brunson's problems. While he did have this amazing wrestling background, he was so worried about striking that he'd run in from the other side of the ring and chase people. And really, when he gets a bit closer, his natural speed plays out better, and it also makes it easier for him to drop on takedowns. If you watch his fight with Izzy, where he's just running at Izzy's hips, and he's never going to take him down because he's showing him the takedown. Whereas against Shabazian, he's getting in close, he's landing good kicks and punches, and then suddenly he'll just pick up a single leg or shuck his way to the guy's back, just enter a clinch, get under his arm before he gets his overhook in properly, and then trip him to the floor easily. It's the most successful I've ever seen Brunson wrestling because he wasn't showing the guy wrestling. And as we always say, like, you don't want to give up all the craziness. He worked out against like Sam Alvey that if he just ran at him and put pressure on him and smashed him against the fence, he could knock him out. But you don't have to lose all of that. Like, there were moments in that Shabazian fight where if he got too close to the fence, like if he pumped a 1-2 or something and Shabazian moved back and hit the fence, he'd lunge in with a second left hand and open himself up a little bit more, but he'd end up in a clinch afterwards. It was really, really interesting. I was so impressed by that performance, and even more impressed just watching it back today than I was at the time. I think calm Derek Brunson and chill getting into range first Derek Brunson is a very dangerous character. The problem I think he's going to have in this one is, can he get into range comfortably against Kevin Holland, who himself is so good nowadays at recognizing that distance is his main strength. I was watching Kevin Holland against Jeff Neal back in the day, and he's leaping in with spazzy sidekicks and things. And I mean, he wins the fight, but he's nowhere near as tidy as he's been lately. Whereas if you watch him against like Joaquin Buckley, he's always in control of where he is. He's barely ever getting hit, and if he is, he's not getting hit clean. And he's just making Buckley look a fool by moving offline, swaying away from blows. Obviously, I think Buckley's a bit shorter than Brunson. He's a real stocky dude for that division. But Holland is so gangly and long. I imagine that he can probably give Brunson some problems doing that. Just keep re-establishing a range that's slightly too long for Brunson to feel comfortable, whereas Brunson has to keep closing the range until he is before he throws, because otherwise he really opens himself up and gets crazy with it. I mean, without getting drawing a direct comparison, think of McGregor versus Mayweather, where Mayweather didn't really do a lot through the first 6 rounds, but what he was doing was refusing to lunge. I mean, he lunged once in the first round, and that was where that uppercut, the basically Connor's big moment in that fight, landed. But most of the fight, he's walking McGregor down, and he's not cutting the ring, but he is constantly readjusting the distance, because McGregor has to keep moving back onto the end of Mayweather's reach to try and set up his counters, and Mayweather just keeps walking up basically as if he wants to get chest to chest with him, and McGregor keeps having to move, and that's tiring in itself. But then as the rounds progress, Mayweather starts getting into range and then throwing a right straight to the body each time. And he wasn't doing an awful lot. He wasn't throwing combinations, but he was just making McGregor re-establish the distance, keeping him under pressure, landing the odd good body shot. And I think for Brunson, that's the key here. You've got to keep walking up into this guy's chest. And obviously, it's a bit different if you're not as defensively savvy as Floyd Mayweather when you're going forward. But I think that's what he needs to do. Keep walking up to Holland and holding off on throwing. Don't get too crazy with it. But do throw if Holland throws, because if the Holland throws, he's close enough to hit. And I think low kicks are a good shout. And I think Brunson kicking more generally is a great idea because he's so strong countering takedown attempts. I seem to remember him doing amazingly, like in wrestling exchanges with Yoel Romero back in the day. But yeah, I was just amazed. Like, he's giving Shabazian his leg in that last fight, like standing very close, throwing body kicks, and Shabazian's catching the leg and unable to do anything with it because Brunson just goes no and takes it back. So while this isn't like marquee tentpole event stuff, I think that's a really compelling fight. But then I said that about Bilal Muhammad versus Leon Edwards, and we got a fucking cursed card out of it. But your co-main event is Gregor Gillespie versus Brad Riddell. Or Riddell? Riddle. Brad Riddell. I like this, but it's a real clash of... main event and co-main, real clash of styles in terms of you've got the very obvious wrestler and the very obvious striker. But Gillespie coming back from absolutely brutal knockout at the hands of Kevin Lee. That was November 2019, so that's a fucking while ago. But honestly, I like that. I'm a big fan of, if you get horribly knocked out, take a good length of time off, even from training. Not even from training. I mean, still hit pads, still you do your conditioning, grapple. But while it's largely bro science and anecdotal, that's all we really have to go on regarding like the chin and the cumulative effects of knockouts on your ability to take a punch. But Pacquiao Marquez is the best example. Pacquiao got starched on his face by Marquez, and Freddie Roach said take a year off. Keep training, but don't take any blows to the head. And since then, Manny Pacquiao's chin has looked absolutely fine. It's been solid, sturdy, never given him any trouble. And then you have those examples like Chuck Liddell, who just kept trying to get one back in the win column, and every time his chin would give out worse. Now, as I said, it's anecdotal, we don't have the science there, but if bro science is all you've got at observation, might as well go on it. If you can afford to take the time off and recover properly, might as well do it. But it does mean that he's got some ring rust, or might have some ring rust, if we believe that's real. But Brad Riddell has been in the cage twice since the last time Gregor Gillespie fought. Been about 5 months since he fought anyway, and there was 5 months between his last fight and that, so he's not super active. It's not like you're getting in against Kevin Holland, having had 2 years off, but he's fought more recently. And Riddell is an interesting guy because he's a city kickboxing lad, and he's got some of their looks, and he had a good kickboxing career, which I haven't watched an awful lot of. There's a great, he's very famous for teeing off on Yi Long, the pretend Chinese monk, in one of their fights. Yi Long doing the iron shirt thing, it'd just be like, hit me, and Brad Riddell just teeing off on him. But Yi Long actually beat him twice and won one, but it was all in China, so I have no idea how legit that is. But Yi Long is a really weird character, and I do quite enjoy him. He's had some good... He's got some cool moves he does in his fights. There's just a lot of hate because he does the fake Shaolin monk thing. Or did. I mean, he's not fought in a while, as far as I know. But Riddell has had a couple of fights in the UFC now. I think he's up to 3. Yeah, Jamie Mullarkey, Magomed Mustafayev, and Alex De Silva. And the most recent one was De Silva. A lot of what you'd expect from city kickboxing is a bit more straightforward than a lot of their fighters. I mean, obviously, Volkanovski, not full-time city kickboxing, but Volkanovski, Kai Kara France, Israel Adesanya, Dan Hooker tend to use a lot more feints in the calf kick. Riddell, a lot more of a banger from what I've seen of him in the UFC at least. But then I don't know what he is in kickboxing because almost, as we've spoken about, almost everyone who kickboxes or does Muay Thai gravitates towards being a puncher in MMA anyway because you don't have to give up your balance. But he does do a cool thing that Prince Naseem used to do, which is he'll throw he'll throw his right shoulder forward as if to do a right straight and loop his arm round at the side in like a little hook action. And guys will reach in to parry and it'll come around the side. and he did it to Mustafayev. I think he did it to De Silva, or he might have done it to Malarkey. But he's done it a couple of times, and both times have been like nice. It's a hard thing to do. It feels quite hard on your shoulder if you try it, but there's a couple that Naz scored like that. Kevin Kelly, I think he knocked down once like that, where Brendan Ingle used to call it changing the path of the punch while you're throwing it. You show him half a straight and then you add a little bit of a loop round. So it's slower. You have to have the guy standing there looking at it, but you do get the benefit of misdirection. It's basically like a Brazilian kick, but with your hand. Now, if you're coming back from a knockout loss, big banger is probably not what you want, like a kickboxing heavy fighter with some decent hands. But on the other hand, Brad Riddell, I think Mustafayev got him down like 8 or 9 times. Hang on, I'm going to check. 8 times in 11 attempts. So pretty amazing takedown percentage for Mustafayev there. Alex De Silva got him down on 3 of 9. Jamie Malarkey, not so great, 3 of 15. But Brad Riddell, not Kevin Lee in wrestling strength. And I think Gregor Gillespie, when you put him against Kevin Lee, you put him in with a guy who's a very, very strong wrestler, and he got caught early. And, with Lee, the game plan is always to try and take it later and wait for him to hit that cardio wall that he seems to struggle with. But it showed up that Gregor Gillespie doesn't have an awful lot on the feet. What he does have is, he's confident, and he can crack pretty decently, and he has a good jab, but only insofar as when he's feeling confident in his wrestling, he can use it to open up further. He can use it to get his opponent's hands up, or he can hurt them if they've got their hands, or if they're solely focused on his takedown attempts. But most of what he does is stick to people and just manhandle them. If you watch his fights with Yancy Medeiros, Vink Pichel, people like that, he just sticks to them. He's on he's got back body lock, he's falling back on crab ride, he doesn't let go of people. And I think his strength in this one is that he's not a get them down, whoa, that's the work done sort of guy. Whereas Mustafayev, there's certainly some of that with him. I can't recall the De Silva fight very well, but I wouldn't be the difference is if you take the fight down and you go, well, that's that done, and then Brad Riddell gets up, that's an issue. Whereas Gregor Gillespie is a guy who gets people down, is all over them, and they might scramble their way back to the feet, but then he just mat returns them. It's that school of wrestling like Habib or Usman. You just stay on the guy. You're constantly trying to control him. And him getting back up is not him leaving your area of the fight. You simply stick to him and control him back to the ground and make him work while you do so. So very interested to see how that goes. I'm leaning heavily towards Gillespie there just because of Riddell's trouble with takedowns in the past and the ability of Gregor Gillespie once he's got a hold of people. He doesn't tend to fuck up and have to do it again. It's more like you get to the end of the round and he goes, oh, okay, well, you start on the feet in the next one. And then it's back to him just being all over you. Tuivasa versus Dontel Mays, as I said, is off the card. We might get a replacement for that, but that's going to happen probably while we're off air. Couple of interesting ones here, like Adrian Yanez versus Gustavo Lopez, really just reminding me that, firstly, as we've said before, quarantine times, lots of guys getting the call up, but it's reminded me that I need to watch more LFA and Combate, because Yanez is LFA alum, and Gustavo Lopez is Combate, or Combate Americas, whatever you want to call it. In fact, he was Combate bantamweight champion, which meant that he got called in to fight Merab Dvalishvili in his first UFC bout, when Dvalishvili's on like a 3-fight streak. Just incredibly bad matchup for him there. But he came back and he beat Anthony Burchak in the first round, finished him. So that was impressive. And then Adrian Yanez, he knocked out a guy in seconds to get through the Contender Series, Brady Huang. Basically moved around a little bit. Huang stepped in and he immediately threw a right straight and a left hook and caught him with both flush on the chin. Incredible. And then Victor Rodriguez was his first fight in the UFC and he beat the shit out of him. He's very interesting. He kind of fights with his hands on his chest. It doesn't really cover very much. Uses his head movement well. He reminds me a little bit of Ricky Simone in that he's hard to hit when he's looking at your punches, but he can also, if he gets caught, he tends to be just straight there for it. So I'm not sure how these two match up, but I'm saying it could be an interesting bout and certainly one to watch. Max Griffin versus Song Kinan, or Kinan Song. Song on a decent little run in the UFC. He came into the UFC on a 2-fight losing streak, which is a bit strange. But since then, he's gone 4-1 in the UFC. Only lost to Alex Morono. Before the UFC, he had a great little run too in China, I think, and he fought Israel Adesanya and got question mark kicked in that one. But that was very early in his career. But his last one, he fought Callan Potter, and he just beat the tar out of him. It was rough. Potter seemed strong in the wrestling, but Song just walked him down and beat him up with his hands. So decent striker. But Max Griffin has that weird sort of American kickboxing style, which we all like, coming off just mutilating a guy's ear, which was very strange. And what I like about Griffin is that he has really... he's much more willing to wrestle. Well, I mean, he's always been willing to wrestle, but like his wrestling's come on in leaps and bounds, and he uses it. Good all-rounder and offensive all-rounder. So that'll be fun enough. You got 3 women's fights. You got Trevin Giles. Yeah, I think that's about it for good fights on that card, to be honest, or things that I'm interested in. Not a super strong card, but hopefully it surprises us. So we'll cut it there for today. Get this out in time to get some views and listens. And then either tomorrow or Friday, I'm dropping a piece on Marvin Hagler. Going to be focusing on sort of what made him unique, his school of switch hitting. You know, he was one of the very first mega successful switch hitters. You know, now we've got Bud Crawford, we've had Prince Nazim, Andre Ward, you know, all the guys I referenced last episode. But when Marvin Hagler did it, it was like, I think Davey Armstrong, the American Olympian, he'd done it a bit, but there weren't many guys out there switch hitting. And he was, even as a southpaw, just straight up, he was quite interesting, quite unique. You know, never engaged in the hand fight, jabbed off the chest, really made use of leaping lead hooks, counterpunched wonderfully with both hands. But we're going to get into all of that in the article. So if you want to get in on the Marvin Hagler piece and everything else we do for the Patreon boys, support the podcast, become a patron. If you want to read what I'm writing at any time, fightprimer.com. And if you want to send an email to the podcast, jackslackpodcast@gmail.com. I am your boy, Jack Slack. Kevin Holland's Ganja Power bless.